So when we are talking about this degrowth, which he applies to undo the effects of industrialization and commercialism, uh, what is degrowth? It is the opposite of those words like growth of economy and economic prosperity. What does it mean? It does not mean that everybody has food to eat. It does not mean that everybody has a house to stay in. It only means that more and more products are manufactured and they create more and more greed, so that there may be so many television companies, so many companies of refrigerators and ACs, and people are bombarded with new products and they keep accumulating newer and newer machines and devices, and the waste is dumped on the earth. So he lists 5 steps in the direction of the degrowth movement. The first one is extremely significant in our society, and especially in the developing worlds: ending planned obsolescence. Now, obsolescence is a word that is derived from obsolete, something that becomes old and useless. So, what happens when we buy a refrigerator? Do we think that it's going to work for 20 years? Don't we say that in my mother's time there is a fridge, that it worked for more than 20 years, and in these days it'll finish off in 4 to 5 years or even less. So it's the same thing for tablets, the same thing for mobiles. So these machines are programmed to stop functioning. Why? Because capitalism prevails here, that more and more products may be manufactured, and the focus or the um, eye is on greater profits. So if you are given a refrigerator which is going to last 20 years, why would you go and buy another? So this is called obsolescence. So capitalism may be built on the idea of rational efficiency, that it is very rational about money production and extraction of resources. Everything is based on reason and very perfectly calculated, but far from it. It is built on obsolescence and inefficiency. Means the inefficiency is very important. Those equipments, those gadgets, those machines are not meant to last very long. So there's an inbuilt inefficiency in them. So you just have to think of machines like refrigerators or mobiles or laptops, which are designed to break down after a certain. So I quote Jason Hickel: between 2010 and 2019, tech companies sold 13 billion smartphones. 13 billion smartphones. Only 3 billion are in use today. This tells us of the heaps of e-waste. Look at the waste that is created, which is in the dumps, in the land dumps, which is going into the oceans with all the toxic metals inside these uh, high tech gadgets. So this is needless waste. So one way out is to create certain legislation which says a right to repair, and it should be made illegal for companies to make things that cannot be repaired. So many times these machines, they break down, but buying a new one is better than getting it repaired. So why is it so? So it is all money that is involved. They want you to buy a new one. So, or uh, if you uh, want to get it repaired, you have to pay a huge sum of money. So we can say so much about the highest selling mobiles today or highest selling laptops today. This exactly is the issue. If something goes wrong, then you have to pay exorbitant sums. So, some legislation should be there to restrict these companies from creating inefficiency in their machines and for making things that cannot be repaired. The second evil that is a product of consumerism, product of capitalism is advertising. So it makes capitalism and consumerism work. So the evils of capitalism and consumerism, their hands get cut if advertisement does not take place. That advertisement and sort of pushing it down people's throats that we are selling this and this product and you must buy it. This has become the order of the day, and literally pushing it down the throats is that you cannot see a video on uh, on your tablet or on your laptop without being forced to watch ads first. And they do not even leave you a choice. I mean, if you don't want to see, can you switch them off? No. So there's a toxic mix of advertising and obsolescence. So this also happens, that advertising has to be there, but also this idea of obsolescence is there. Fashion companies manufacture cheap clothes which have short lives. So we can see this. So the bigger the company, the more privileged the company, uh, the more expensive are the repairs related to its products. So legislation can curb the power of advertising to limit its power, and we see how it entices one, and how even it disturbs you when you are doing work on your computer and the ads keep coming. So what will happen when advertising is limited? It will ease useless consumption and free imagination and creativity. So there's something about this that Jason Hickel says, that when you see these ads, they put a limit on your thinking, they put a limit on your imagination. This is it and this is it. That's what the ad says. You can't think of anything beyond. It's like they close your mind to the other world around you. So if these advertisements are controlled, then useless buying, useless consumption will be controlled, and free imagination and creativity. So creativity and imagination will be freed. So we already know about the landfills, and we know about buying a lawn mower that we bought. It was a electronic gadget and it was so good, and then it is lying there and it is not used, or it is used maybe once a month or maybe in 6 months. So what is the way out of this? You buy expensive exercising gear and you don't use them for some reason. It's there, it's lying there, it's useless. So what is the way out? What way does he suggest? He suggests that, for example, when we talk about gardening tools, the expensive lawn mower, which you will use once in a month and then it will be gathering dust, or expensive apparatus for exercising. So why not have a neighborhood in which you can place all these things in one place, and anyone can borrow and use and then return it. So in this way it will save money, it will save space, and it will reduce useless buying. So this culture, even the culture of those short films, the short videos, the habit is coming on in mobiles and all, that when you use them you have those short videos, and they take away one's creativity and imagination. And the most interesting thing is that when you look at those shots, then everybody's a doctor, everybody's an expert cook, everybody has the perfect recipe for perfect skin, for perfect hair. So actually, it is quite laughable also. But that is what is made use of by companies to force their products uh, down your throat so that you will be forced to buy it, and when you buy it you realize that well, you just bought it because you heard about it and you kept seeing those ads and you were intrigued, and then that thing is lying around and useless. So advertisement needs to be cut down. So another thing we just talked about was buying a lot of useless stuff. It has become like a disease with us, and capitalism is responsible. So the solution for this whole lot of stuff lying around and nobody wants it, in a country like India, there is a poorer population where one can recycle one's goods and give them the things that one feels are in excess. But it's not so in Western countries. That's why they have garage sales. So the solution for all this, to reduce this waste and this useless buying, shared equipment and creating neighborhood workshops for gardening tools can slow down consumption. It is the same with using cars individually. Fewer cars would help us breathe easier, and many countries, many European cities, they have created uh, bicycle paths and areas where cars are not allowed. So, more and more pathways for bicycles are created in order to clear the air of pollution and to make it healthier. And we know that using bicycles is a good exercise in comparison to using cars, good for body and good for environment. And that reminds me of our hill stations in India. Some 20 or 30 years ago, they were roads used to be fresh and green, and there used to be mud paths also, dirt roads also, muddy paths where there is no concrete road. So horses could walk those roads, and people had to do a lot of walking. But today, what is the state of these hill stations? They are in the highest spots, which were a pleasure to walk to. They are overrun with cars. Overrun with cars, the fresh mountain air, that is, it is polluted with petrol. So, and those paths that afforded easy walking, now they become precarious and dangerous. Nobody wants to be run over by a car while walking along a narrow road. So this is how industry and consumerism, they destroy environments. In such places, there should be, in such places which are natural sanctuaries, which improve people's health, which are places where one can be in commune with nature, where one can relax in nature. Such places should ban cars, and they should have more bicycles and more space to walk. But unfortunately, it is not so. Food waste is another issue. So, Jason Hicks quotes in a report, 50% of all food produced worldwide, equal to 2 billion tons, is wasted. So, 50% of all food produced worldwide, equal to 2 billion tons, is wasted. Beef eating in the Western world needs large amount of land for feed. 60% of global agricultural land is used for growing that feed. So the obsession of the West with eating meat leads to agricultural land being used for growing feed, and it's a kind of destructive this thing of native crops, that only feed will be grown. And so the world over, there are people who are becoming conscious of this, and they are switching to vegetarian diets and vegan diets. So what are these? These are diets which do not want uh, uh, processed food from the industries. The vegan diet is one which does not want milk, butter, dairy, all that which comes through the industry. They don't want that. That's why it's vegan. So switching to vegetarian diet would save 11 million square miles of land, equal to the size of US, Canada and China. So look at the way cattle are fed, and because of their feed, how much of land and agriculture is taken up. And it's not that human beings cannot do without meat, but these are habits that are difficult to break. So you can see that switching to a vegetarian diet can save 11 million square miles of land, equal to the size of US, Canada and China, and that is really huge. And there are other things that he suggests, taxing red meat and to end subsidies to these beef farmers in affluent countries. So some part of action from the government to save climate impacts would be to tax red meat. But red meat is such an important food in the West that it's really odd if somebody goes to America and that person is vegetarian. So it becomes very difficult to sort of find proper vegetarian food, because generally it's all meat everywhere, all kinds of meat. It becomes difficult for a vegetarian to say, I'm a vegetarian, and then say, okay, they will say, we'll supply salad or soup, but in that also there will be meat. So there's an obsession with meat in the Western world, irrespective of the fact that it harms the earth, it creates global warming, and it also is a problem for the human body. Now let's go to another example uh, of climate activism, and this is a very famous example of climate activism in India, and it is called the Chipko movement. Ramchandra Guha, in his book The Unquiet Woods, informs about the Chipko movement. Chipko movement was a movement to save the trees from felling in the Uttarakhand area, and this was uh, embracing the trees. Chipko, so embracing trees, that's what it means. He covers the history and the trajectory of the Chipko movement in the Himalayan region, which arose because of unabated commercial felling of trees and exploitation of forest for resin, turpentine, etc. So resin is the gum that comes out of trees. They make a cut in the bark of the tree, and then the resin leaks out. It was a remarkable movement of climate activism in which even women participated. The villagers who participated in it were unlettered, but they influenced government policy after that. So, as an outcome of the Chipko movement, for the first time in the history of India, forest legislation was introduced to conserve forest and protect biodiversity. So, when the villagers rebelled and this Chipko movement started, after that there was government legislation to protect and conserve forest and to protect biodiversity. The 1970s flood was devastating. The flooding of the Bhagirathi and the Alaknanda rivers resulted in heavy loss of cattle and human lives. Guha mentions how it created awareness in the villagers because it was a turning point in the ecological history of the region. and the villagers began to understand the links between deforestation, landslides, and floods. And it was observed that some of the villages most affected by the landslides lay directly below the forest where felling operations had taken place. So, in this way, what the official government official did not see, the forest folk saw, and they saw the increasing connection between erosivity and floods on one hand and mass scale felling of trees on the other hand. So he quotes um, from, and I have quoted him from the Unquiet Woods. So we are discussing his ideas in his book, The Unquiet Woods. So after this Chipko uh, movement took place initially, then it was followed in other parts of Uttarakhand, and the volunteers of this movement, they would go to other forests and listen to the uh, travails of the village folk, and then they would start agitating. So there was a case of this rainy forest situated near Joshimath in the Alaknanda valley, um, and a forest auction was to be held, and about 2,000 trees had been marked for felling. But things took a dramatic turn. What happened? The contractor's men were traveling to Reni from Joshimath, and they stopped the bus shortly before Reni and took a shortcut and made directly for the forest. A small girl spied the workers with their implements. They were coming to cut the trees. She rushed to Gaura Devi, the head of the village Mahila Mandal, and Gaura Devi quickly mobilized the other housewives um, and went to the forest. And they pleaded with the laborers not to start the felling operations, and they initially met with abuse and threats, but the women would not move, they would not budge, and then the men had to give up and had to withdraw. So we can see how women also participated in this, and the incident in Reni Forest is a very good example how women power uh, came into play during this movement. So the leader of the Chipko movement was Sundarlal Bahuguna. And what were the outcomes of the Chipko movement? The movement under the leadership of Sundarlal Bahuguna did not stop even when he was put into prison. And then similar forms of activism prevailed in different parts of Uttarakhand. In the Tieri district, when the forest department did not respond to their calls to save the trees from felling, they started bandaging the scarred cheer trees. So imagine this. Trees are living things for these forest folk. They started bandaging those trees that had been scarred and cut for extraction of resins. Scarring, which was caused from the extraction of resin, made trees more susceptible to destruction by lightning. Villagers in Khujni Patti removed the iron leaves inserted in the trees to extract resin. So you can see how this activism took different forms in different forests in Uttarakhand. And then it turned into an agitation. The Andolan or agitation began just before the proposed logging in the Malgaddi forest in 1978, but gathered momentum when Bahuguna went on a fast in 1979. And what were the marked features of this Andolan? Participation of all classes, irrespective of caste and or status, and showed that everyone in the forest was affected. Women, government servants, and defense personnel played an important role, though the latter did so in a covert manner. Children too joined in, and the teachers supported them, and the teachers were caught in between the two lines. They supported the children to join the movement, and they were hauled up by the police because they were supposed to be the learned ones, and they should be the one to control children from running away from school. So Chipko became an ideological movement and played a role in removing the alienation between humans and nature, which had been created by industry and commerce, which had been created by capitalism. Other features were solidarity, community solidarity, involvement of hill folk from different cross sections of society. So we already know there were the forest personnel were also there, the hill folk were there, the laborers were there. So there was a cross section. And as the volunteers, after a movement took place in one forest, they moved on to the other. So actually it was caused by the lack of fulfillment of basic needs of education and health and employment, and this accumulated into grievances that resulted in the Chipko movement. One activist put it thus: हमें थोड़ा सा अनाज मिला, जब उससे भी नहीं पका सके तो आंदोलन करना पड़ा. The uncut woods. This referred to the fact that when they were denied even wood to cook their meager rations, they had to resort to activism. And many of these activists were youth. So here's a list of young climate activists, and from all over the world, from Ukraine, from Kenya, from also there's one important mention here, number 5, Michaela Loach is a medical student along with being a sustainable lifestyle blogger. She became aware of the connection between climate crisis and refugee crisis when she visited Calais in France. Now, where is Calais? As of now, there are 1,000 migrants and asylum seekers in Calais, France, living in makeshift camps, waiting to get to UK by crossing the English Channel. So these are asylum seekers, these are migrants who have been displaced because of political problems in their country or because of climate problems. And they are waiting in Calais in makeshift shelters, refugee shelters, waiting to get into UK by crossing the English Channel. And they face great cruelty and unpleasantness as they stay there. They are victims of, so from wherever they have come, they have been already victims of extreme climate events and brutal political regimes, but they continue to suffer police brutality because of the issue that the government doesn't want their camps to become permanent. So they are constantly harassed by the police. In 2016, a large camp called the Calais Jungle was demolished, which had schools, shops, and restaurants, and was supported by artists, activists, and other charitable organizations. So Greta Thunberg is also one of those. So you can have a look at these lists. There's one from Kerala also, John Paul Jose, and he has appeared and talked on TEDx Talk 2 about climate change and global warming on the forest and ecosystems in India. There is a comic here, please do see it, created in Norway, and it covers, I think, climate change in totality. It is well presented, so you must look at it. So now this is the last lesson of this course. I hope you got to learn about climate change and literature and saw the various dimensions of the connection between climate change and literature. Let us just take a quick look at all the weeks that we have done, all the topics that we have covered in these uh, in this 3-month course. We were introduced to climate change. We learnt about the theoretical concepts of climate change and literature, how they are viewed, various perspectives. We were introduced to movements. We were introduced to climate non-fiction, which was greatly informative and should help you to do further studies in this area. Climate poetry and climate fiction are not only a source of entertainment but a source of great information about the humanities perspective of climate change, and so are drama and films. Watching them builds the idea that something needs to be done about climate change, and this idea could not have been presented to the common man through the sciences, which are rather straight-jacketed and difficult to understand. So drama and films perform a valuable role in conveying the effects of climate impact, its urgency, and the resolutions that can be worked at. In the same way, science fiction tells us how it deals with climate and how climate is a part of the dystopian environments that are there in the stories of climate fiction. We also went back to ancient wisdom in the form of folk tales and myths related to climate change and literature. We have also discussed two major writers of today associated with climate change and literature. One is Amitav Ghosh, and the second one is a Norwegian ecologist and activist, Arne Næss. So Arne Næss not only tells you about the impacts of climate change and the resolutions one can find, but it also inspires you to take action. He talks in his philosophy that humanities is important. The human element, the ethical element, the creativity, the heart and the soul are important when we talk about the impacts of climate change. Though he talks a lot about science, but he talks about the connection between psychology, literature, ethics and values. And lastly, we have considered climate activism, which is the most important thing. After you read and you learn about the impacts of climate change, action should be taken, and there are numerous role models around the world who tell you about how climate activism has helped frame government policy and has brought change in their countries. And so this has happened in many countries. I hope you found this course inspiring and informative, and I hope it prepares you for further studies in the area and to do your own bit to reverse the impacts of climate that are threatening us and our future generations. Thank you and all the best to you.